The summer sky above Leningrad shone a clear, brilliant blue, and the spires of the city glittered like gold in the sunlight. Gardens and parks were alive with fresh colours, a final burst of beauty before the front claimed us. That morning, the city looked almost unreal, as though every stone and flower had been painted for farewell. On the 25th of July, 1941, I marched with my fellow recruits through the familiar streets. We were bound for Narva, the western frontier, where our regiment was to take up positions. As we passed the houses, schools, and parks of our childhoods, many of us could not stop glancing back. Even as the Narva gates shrank in the distance, our eyes clung to the city, to the memories of families we might never see again. When we arrived, we were assigned to the 105th Separate Rifle Regiment. That very night, our company was ordered to occupy combat outposts along the Narva River. The commanders gave brief instructions, their voices low, while soldiers tightened their belts and checked their weapons. We moved out carefully, advancing in a silent column through the undergrowth. The river whispered somewhere ahead. Private Romanov walked in front of me, moving with such care that not a single twig cracked beneath his boots. Whenever his shoulder brushed a branch, he stopped at once, turned back and hissed, "Quiet!" His whisper was tense, sharp, almost a command. At last we reached our assigned position, a hollow beneath a low willow tree. The ground sloped gently toward the river, which drifted quietly past in the dark. We lay down in the grass and waited, listening to its steady murmur. The silence around us was unnatural, heavy and unbroken. Even the stars seemed frozen above, hanging motionless over the black treetops. The reeds along the river bank swayed faintly, and every so often a strange cry echoed from the far side, repeating like a ghostly chant, "Politz, Politz, Politz." Before us stretched meadows and woods. A squirrel darted along a branch and stopped, its bright eyes flashing toward us before it bounded away. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, grass, and pine. At dawn, Lieutenant Kruglov, our company commander, led us to inspect the riverbank. His face was calm, though his eyes scanned every shadow. Suddenly, on the opposite bank, a figure appeared. A woman stepped from the trees, moving slowly, her head bowed. She wore a long black skirt and a blouse that seemed far too heavy for the summer heat. With careful, measured steps, she placed 2 baskets on the shore and began lowering clothes into the water. The sight unsettled us. Romanov squinted, suspicion burning in his eyes. He muttered that it might be a trap. "Comrades," he whispered, "why would a woman wash laundry here, in sight of our rifles?" Kruglov studied her for a moment, then quietly replied, "There's something not right about her. But let's wait. Our scouts are watching." The woman moved with mechanical precision, dipping the clothes, wringing them, and folding them into her basket. She seemed utterly unconcerned, as if no war raged around her. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she lifted her baskets and retreated into the trees. Romanov exhaled sharply. "You see? That's no simple peasant. That's a laundress with a mission." He spat into the dirt and shook his head. "Mark my words, comrades, we'll see her again," Kruglov reassured us. "Perhaps. But don't forget, we have men in that village. If there is danger, they will warn us." His voice was steady, meant to calm the nerves that even he surely felt. Not long after, a roar of engines broke the quiet. Across the river, German motorcycles appeared, bouncing over the uneven ground, their riders wearing steel helmets that glinted in the sun. One after another, they dismounted, spreading out along the opposite shore. We crouched low in the grass, gripping our rifles. Romanov's eyes narrowed. "They'll report back," he whispered. "They'll say the river is clear. No Russians on this side. That means they'll try to cross." The commander's face hardened. "Keep still." We wait. His words were calm, but his jaw was set like iron. The Germans walked to the water's edge, peering into the current as if to measure its depth. Some stooped and splashed their hands. Others smoked casually, as though they were not a few steps from our rifles. The arrogance of it made my stomach twist. Then the unmistakable sound of aircraft engines thundered overhead. Messerschmitts swept across the sky, flying low. Their shadows raced over the river as the roar filled our ears. We flattened ourselves against the ground, clenching our teeth, waiting for the scream of bombs. The planes passed, wheeling toward another target, but their presence left a warning. The enemy's eye was upon us. I tightened my grip on my rifle until my knuckles whitened. Around me, men exchanged brief glances, their faces pale. We all knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The real storm had not yet broken, but it was coming, swift, merciless, and soon. Above us, the sky suddenly tore open with the growl of engines. Soviet fighters appeared, a handful of falcons wheeling boldly through the clouds. To our amazement, they dived straight at a much larger group of German aircraft. From the opposite bank, the German motorcyclists stopped to watch the dogfight. After a brief exchange of words, they swung back into their saddles and disappeared, leaving only dust and silence behind. Romanov leaned close to me. His voice was calm, though heavy with meaning. Don't be surprised by what I say now. There will be a battle here, soon, and when it comes, none of us will speak calmly like this again. I studied his face. His eyes, dark and unwavering, carried both trust and sorrow. Then, from his tunic pocket, he drew out a photograph. An older man of about 55, broad-shouldered, with Romanov's same sharp features. Handing it to me, he asked quietly, "Do you think this is my father?" "Yes," I said. "It must be." Romanov sighed. "I have never seen him. He left for the war in 1914, and 1 month later he was gone forever, killed here on these very banks. My mother told me only that much. You understand now why I cannot retreat from this river, not a single step backward." The words carried weight. Commander Kruglov overheard and nodded firmly. "Who told you we would retreat?" he barked. "We will fight here, for our brothers who fell on these fields during the Civil War. We will fight for Soviet power and for Russia's honor." His voice was steady, almost defiant, and for a moment, even fear itself seemed to shrink away. Time passed, though I could not say how much. Then the sound of engines rose again from across the Narva. More motorcycles appeared, and this time an armored car rumbled behind them, its steel hull catching the sunlight. 2 German officers climbed down lazily, walking with practiced arrogance. Another man followed, tall, broad, his uniform stiff with medals. Through the telescope, I recognized him instantly, the very same laundress who had washed clothes in the river earlier. He gestured toward our side of the bank, speaking quickly, his tone confident. The Germans studied their maps, pointed and nodded. Soon, I thought, their units would try to cross. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the silence. A bullet whined overhead, and instantly the river bank exploded into sound. Machine guns and rifles hammering as though the world itself had erupted. I swung my sights toward the tall officer. Heart pounding, I pulled the trigger. My rifle slammed back into my shoulder. The officer staggered, hands clutching at his chest, then collapsed forward into the dirt. For a moment he tried to rise, crawling on his knees, but his strength failed. He pitched sideways, his arms spread awkwardly. I had fired my first shot in anger. The man before me was dead. Yet there was no sense of triumph in me, only a hollow weight, an ache I had not expected. My mind flashed back to faces in Osvianica, to farmers and workers who had never lifted a weapon. The German officer had been an enemy, yes, but he had been alive, breathing moments before. Now he was still, forever. Even so, I found myself reloading automatically, my body working faster than my thoughts. I searched the smoke and grass for the next target, my heart hammering harder with each breath. Then Kruglov's furious voice cut through the noise. "Who fired that first shot?" The squad froze. Around us, bullets cracked through branches and ricocheted off stones. Our commander's anger was raw. "Do you even understand what you've done? You could have waited. You might have dropped many of them at once, not just one." From behind, Private Gerasimov stepped forward, pale and trembling. He straightened his back, saluted sharply, and confessed in a strained voice, "Comrade Commander, it was me." My nerves could not take it any longer. That evening, our company marched to the battalion's location. A new trench had been dug there, deep and carefully camouflaged. Other soldiers already occupied it, some eating, some talking quietly, others lying down in silence. A few men washed their mess tins in a bucket of water, their movements weary, automatic, as though they had done the same 1,000 times. Our sleep that night was restless. The sky above the front lines glowed faintly with artillery flashes. From the direction of Kingisepp came the dull thunder of guns. Every so often the roar would fade, leaving only silence so complete it seemed unnatural. Even then, our sentries paced back and forth, whispering quietly to one another, rifles gripped tightly in their hands. We were waiting for something, though none of us knew quite what. When dawn broke, many soldiers sat on the bare ground, squinting toward the opposite shore of the river. Their eyes were ringed with fatigue, yet they were ready at any moment to leap up and fight. Some smoked, others whispered hurried conversations, voices hushed, afraid of betraying their position. More than once, a man glanced at a photograph, holding it so close to his chest that no one else could see. Each of us was thinking of home, of families we might never see again. Then, faintly, came the hum of engines. At first we thought it distant thunder, but it grew louder, the sound of aircraft moving in formation across the sky. We froze in our trench, watching the heavens. "They're slithering up, the snakes," Romanov muttered darkly. "Maybe they'll even drop a bomb on my house in Leningrad." His words stabbed at me. For a moment my chest burned with homesickness, with fear for my own loved ones. I lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, the tiny flame barely visible in the grey dawn, then crushed it out quickly and pushed my rifle tighter into the dirt. Above, the steady thrum of planes thickened, filling the air like an omen. Days passed in this way. We dug deeper into the earth, reinforcing the trench. The Germans across the Narva grew bolder, probing our defences. Skirmishes erupted, sometimes just exchanges of fire, sometimes sharp, bloody encounters that left the ground littered with wreckage. It was clear that the enemy was testing us, measuring our strength, waiting for the chance to strike in full force. Among ourselves, we sensed the tension rising. Each man acted differently. Some checked their rifles obsessively, over and over, unable to sit still. Others smoked endlessly, cigarette after cigarette. A few withdrew into silence, staring blankly into the distance, their thoughts unknowable. The river, deceptively calm, mirrored the forests on either bank. From where I crouched, I could see the far side, as though it were a painted picture. Cottages, a dirt road, fields stretching away into the haze. Somewhere in that landscape, German eyes were certainly fixed upon us, watching. In the trench with me sat two soldiers I had not met before. One was an old veteran, slow-moving but steady. The other was a boy, barely a man, whose hands trembled each time he touched his weapon. The old soldier grinned when he caught the youth's fear. "What's the matter, lad? Scared?" The boy tried to laugh but failed. "Uncle Vasya, I've never heard shooting so close before. You'll get used to it." "And if you don't," the veteran shrugged, "then you won't last." His words were blunt, but not unkind. At that moment, Viktor Vladimirovich, our commander, crouched beside us. His uniform was dusty, his face lined with fatigue. He whispered an order, and I immediately followed him back to the company command post. Romanov was there too, his blonde hair catching the light. He bent over a map, tracing the German positions with his finger. He looked weary, but his movements were precise. "I had a letter from home," he said quietly. "My mother wrote that she hasn't slept in days. She fears every plane that passes overhead is dropping bombs on Leningrad." I can't read her words without anger boiling in my chest. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into his pocket. Then came a sudden shout from the forest edge. "Stop!" A command voice, harsh and urgent. At once, rifles swung toward the trees. The battalion had taken positions covering the western side of the airfield. The southern approaches, however, lay more exposed, kept free of troops, but dangerously open. On the forest's edge, I noticed two soldiers crouched low, hiding behind a heavy machine gun. They looked nervous, their shoulders hunched, their eyes darting constantly. For a moment they did not move at all, as though frozen. "Grisha, don't be afraid," one whispered to the other. His voice carried a forced cheer. "This is our business, comrade. Fear is shameful in front of your brothers. Look at me. I smile and laugh at death." But his words trembled, and his smile was weak. I remembered seeing those same men only hours earlier during the artillery barrage. Now they seemed like shadows of themselves, hollowed out by exhaustion and dread, The moon rose high, casting silver light across the entire field. The Narva River glittered in its glow, reeds swaying faintly along the banks. Somewhere to the right, our anti-aircraft guns suddenly barked, their tracers streaking into the dark sky. Golden explosions blossomed far above as enemy planes passed overhead. At that moment, Zakharov, one of our commanders, strode up. At his side walked a soldier named Bulkin, his head lowered. Zakharov's face was twisted with fury. He jabbed a finger at the ground in front of us, barking, "Stand here, you coward! Do you think you can run from the fight?" His fists clenched, as though he might strike Bulkin himself. Bulkin stammered an excuse, his voice breaking. "Comrade Commander, I wasn't fleeing. I only went to look for water. I swear it." Zakharov's eyes burned. "Water? Then why is your belt still heavy with a full canteen? Do not lie to me." Bulkin swallowed hard, his lips quivering. His hands fumbled at the rifle strap across his chest, but he could not meet Zakharov's stare. The commander pressed a pistol to his chest and snarled, "If I catch you again running from duty, justice will be swift." The air grew colder as the night deepened. In the moonlight, I could see figures moving across the far side of the river, shadowy shapes advancing slowly, step by step, toward the airstrip. The Germans were coming, behind them, others spread out, their machine guns glinting faintly as they took aim across the water. Then the earth shook. A shell screamed overhead and detonated in the middle of the airfield, throwing dirt high into the sky. At once, a storm of fire erupted. Heavy and light machine guns alike hammered from both banks. German soldiers toppled, their bodies jerking under the bursts, while others threw themselves flat and crawled forward. The air was filled with smoke and sparks, the roar of battle drowning every other sound. Beside me, the young soldier Grisha, pale with terror, suddenly dropped to his knees. His voice cracked as he shouted at the Germans across the river, "Vermin, this heat is not for you." His cry was shrill, desperate, almost madness. Uncle Vasya, the old veteran, wiped his brow calmly and muttered, "This is a different matter entirely." The fighting raged for nearly 2 hours. The Germans pressed hard, clinging to the riverbank, but every attempt to cross was thrown back. The sound of rifles and cannons tore the night apart, and each blast sent echoes rolling through the forest. The air was thick with the stink of smoke, powder, and sweat. Only when the moon sank low did the chaos fade. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The ground was littered with fallen comrades, their faces pale in the dim light. I gazed over the bodies, my heart heavy as stone. Among them I recognized friends with whom I had laughed only the day before, and there, among the dead, lay our platoon leader, Ivan Sukhov. At dawn the sun rose, casting light over a field scarred by craters and stained with blood. The white nights of midsummer Leningrad were ending, but for us, time had already lost all meaning. Life and death blended into one endless twilight of waiting, fighting, and loss. That evening, as the sun set and the mist began to gather, Romanov ordered the sniper Volodya Sidorov and me to scout the forest near the river. "If you discover anything important, return at once," he told us quietly. We crept along the edge of the thicket, dew soaking through our boots. The air was heavy with the strange brightness of the white night clouds drifted across the pale sky, sometimes parting, sometimes clinging to the horizon. The moon appeared and disappeared, silvering the meadows in brief flashes. From the distance, faint thunder rolled. Lightning flickered far away, casting the woods in ghostly light. "Did you get a letter?" Sidorov asked softly. "No," I answered. "Did you?" "Yes, I did." He hunched his shoulders, shivering in the damp. "My wife wrote again. She worries constantly. I managed to visit her once before we were sent out here and left her some money for the children. My daughter is only 10. I think of her every hour. War takes everything from us, but not from them. Not yet. I hope she will not forget my face." I nodded. His words carried a quiet ache that hung in the air even after we fell silent. We crouched down again. Sidorov's eyes were sharper than mine, his attention fixed on the undergrowth. He whispered suddenly, "There's something moving in the bushes." "Listen." I strained my ears. A A faint rustle crept through the grass. My heart quickened. Slowly, a shape emerged from the gloom. A man, crawling on hands and knees, dragging himself clumsily. In his right hand, he clutched a pistol, his arm trembling with weakness. His left arm was bound in a filthy bandage. His chest rose and fell in laboured gasps, his mouth gaping like a drowning man. His eyes rolled, unfocused. Sidorov sprang forward and kicked the pistol aside. I rushed to help, grabbing the man under his shoulders. He was too weak to resist, his breath rattling in his throat. "It's a German," Sidorov said flatly. "He's wounded, but he can still speak." "We'll interrogate him," the man muttered in broken Russian, his voice a rasp. "Water, please." We handed him a canteen. He drained it greedily, clutching it with both hands like a starving animal. Then, coughing and groaning, he slumped back against the tree trunk. His body quivered, half delirious. Yet when Romanov arrived, the German suddenly straightened and tried to salute with his good arm, collapsing almost immediately afterward. His strength was nearly gone. The decision was quick. "Take him to the command post," Romanov ordered. "We'll question him later." We dragged the prisoner back through the grass, his boots scraping dully on the ground. By the time we reached the trench, he had sunk into unconsciousness. That night, Kruglov studied the German closely, his expression unreadable. The man's face was haggard, his cheeks sunken. Yet his uniform was clean, his boots well made. Clearly he had not been a peasant soldier, perhaps an officer. Kruglov leaned in and whispered to him in German. The man stirred, but said nothing. Later, Kruglov opened a large map, spreading it over a plank in the dugout. His finger tapped the Narva-Kingisepp road. "This," he told us grimly, "is their target. If the Germans seize this road, our forces will be encircled. We must not let them." The men around him grew tense, listening with narrowed eyes. Romanov clenched his rifle. "If they bring tanks, we'll fight them on the riverbank. If they bring infantry, we'll crush them in the trenches. Whatever happens, comrades, the Narva must hold." The night dragged on. At dawn, the distant drone of engines rose again. By 5 o'clock, the sound of motors filled the sky. Shadows of German planes passed overhead, their outlines sharp against the pale light. From the trenches, soldiers craned their necks to watch. Then the first bombs fell. Explosions rocked the fields, sending earth showering over us. Our anti-aircraft guns spat fire into the sky, tracers streaking toward the enemy. At 6, a lone reconnaissance plane darted low over our positions. Our gunners opened up at once, riddling it with fire until it spiraled into the ground beyond the river. The men cheered, but it was a cheer laced with fear. Each of us knew more would come, many more. By 8 o'clock, as the sun climbed over the horizon, I looked around at the trench. Faces were pale, lips cracked, hands trembling on rifle stocks. The fear in our chests had hardened into something else, a terrible anticipation. Every man was waiting for the storm to break. "To tell you the truth, Grisha," I whispered, "I don't like to boast about our victories. The newspapers make them sound too easy. Cavalry charges, broken lines, bayonets flashing. But they don't tell of the fear or the exhaustion. Out here the infantry always pay the real price." The machine guns cracked again, their stuttering bursts ripping through the night. My lips were dry, my throat burning with smoke. It was hard to believe we had endured so much already, and still the enemy came. My comrade Yerosh, crouched nearby, muttered between clenched teeth, "The Germans are preparing something larger. Wait and see. Their cavalry will come soon." I stared at him in disbelief. Cavalry. But even as I thought it, the image came unbidden. Horses surging over the field, sabres drawn, bayonets lowered, their riders howling. I shook the thought away, pressing the stock of my rifle against my cheek. At that moment Romanov appeared, his face pale in the moonlight. He gave a quick order. "Prepare for battle. Watch the officers, the machine gunners. Do not forget the flanks. And you, Uncle Vasya," he pointed to the veteran, "keep your eyes on the forest. They will try to outflank us." We all rose slowly, hearts hammering. Beside me, Sidorov adjusted his scope, pressing his face against the cold metal. His hands trembled, yet his eyes were sharp, fixed on the dark line of trees. Suddenly he whispered, "Movement!" A shell screamed overhead and burst among the trees, lighting the forest in a red glare. More explosions followed, tearing down branches, filling the night with smoke. The Germans were advancing. "Are we firing our artillery too early?" Sidorov hissed. "Why aren't they firing at the right time?" Romanov shook his head. "It's a feint. They want to wear us down." The ground shook as another wave of shells landed, blasting the earth around us. Dirt and smoke rained down, choking the trench. We crouched low, coughing, blinking through the haze. For a moment the barrage was so heavy that the world seemed nothing but fire and thunder. Then came the silence. Too sudden. Too complete. "Stay ready," Romanov murmured. "The storm isn't over." Sidorov's eyes widened. "Look!" He pointed toward the riverbank. In the pale light of dawn we saw them clearly. Enemy infantry crawling forward, rifles clutched to their chests, bayonets glinting faintly. Behind them lumbered armoured carriers, their treads grinding through the mud. Our rifles opened fire. The air was filled with the crack of shots, the metallic rattle of machine guns. Across the bank, men toppled into the water, others slumped into the reeds. Yet still they came, more and more, as if the earth itself was spewing them forth. From the opposite side, their artillery roared again. Shells burst among us, throwing soil high into the air, tearing open the ground. We pressed ourselves into the trench as explosions rained down. Smoke and dust thickened, blotting out the sky. Then, faint through the roar, I heard a new sound. Engines. Self-propelled guns rolled forward, their barrels raised, their armour glinting. German infantry followed closely, moving with mechanical precision. They fired in bursts, covering each other's advance. One shell fell so close that it sent me sprawling, ears ringing, mouth filled with dirt. I spat, pulled myself up, and pressed the rifle back to my shoulder. "Hold steady!" Krugloff shouted. "Don't waste your shots!" At 6 o'clock sharp, as the sun burned through the haze, our anti-aircraft guns thundered. A German reconnaissance plane swooped low over the river. Our gunners riddled it with fire, and it burst into flames, plunging nose first into the earth. For a moment we cheered, a brief, fleeting relief, but already new engines roared in the distance. The battle was only beginning. The Germans advanced with heavy machine guns, their fire sweeping the fields as they crawled toward the riverbank. The grass trembled under the storm of bullets. Each burst ripped closer, forcing us lower into the dirt. Nazis brought up a heavy machine gun to the edge of a brick grove. Its muzzle flared, hammering round after round. I tried to silence it with my rifle, but the gunner was too well hidden, the nest dug deep into rubble and shielded by stone. Explosions tore open the battlefield. Sidorov, crouched beside me, was nearly buried by clumps of dirt as shells rained down. Our own fire answered weakly, but still we held the trench. Drozdov, his uniform blackened by smoke, suddenly climbed out with his Degtyarev machine gun, standing fully exposed. He fired in short bursts, his jaw clenched, eyes flashing with determination. "Come on! Cover me!" he shouted. "Don't let them reach the bank!" I scrambled after him, my hands shaking as I tried to reload. The shockwave of another blast knocked me sideways, but I forced myself upright. Everywhere men were pinned down, their faces pale with exhaustion, their helmets dented, their eyes red with powder smoke. Then I saw Private Lesher Balkan. With astonishing speed, he dashed forward, carrying a bundle of grenades. He vaulted into a shell crater, then leapt again toward a tank lumbering closer. His figure seemed impossibly small against the steel giant. A moment later, he vanished in a cloud of fire and smoke as the grenades detonated. When the haze cleared, the tank lay crippled, its side torn open. But at that same instant, another tank's shell burst near me. The world exploded into noise and fire. I staggered, ears ringing, my body numb. When I looked back, the tank was still grinding forward, smoke pouring from its exhaust. Romanov appeared suddenly, gripping my arm. His face was grim, but his eyes burned with resolve. "Hold the line. Don't fall back," he shouted. His words cut through the chaos like steel. We fought blindly, our hands blistered, our rifles hot to the touch. The Germans surged closer again and again, only to be beaten back with bullets, grenades, and sheer desperation. My memory of those minutes is a blur. Flashes of men collapsing, earth spraying upward, the endless rattle of machine guns. When at last the firing slackened, I found myself beside Romanov. His face was grey with dust. Around us the trench was littered with debris, the cries of the wounded rising above the fading echoes. Beyond the ravine, flames still smouldered where shells had struck. We buried the dead quickly, our shovels cutting into the earth with a dull, merciless rhythm. Later that day, Kruglov gathered us again. His voice was hoarse but strong. "Comrades, listen well. We have beaten them back for now, but this is only the beginning. They will come again, stronger. Our task remains the same. Tear the fascists from our land. Destroy their tanks, their guns, their transports. We will not let them reach Leningrad." We stood in silence, staring at him, our faces gaunt, our uniforms tattered, yet in our eyes burned the same grim fire. The next morning the Germans struck at dawn. Bombers circled high overhead, dropping wave after wave of shells onto our positions. The trench shook like a ship in a storm. Smoke smothered the sky until the sun was only a pale disk above the carnage. Through the haze, enemy tanks rolled forward. Infantry followed, bayonets fixed, their shouts piercing the thunder. Romanov gritted his teeth. "Ready yourselves! This is it!" We fired until our rifles smoked, until our shoulders ached with the recoil. Men fell, but still the line held. When the smoke finally cleared, the river bank was littered with enemy dead. The water itself ran dark, carrying bodies downstream. At last, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of smouldering grass and the groans of the wounded. For a moment, we sat stunned, unable to believe we had survived. But in our hearts we all knew this was not victory. It was only the first test, and many more would follow. Only days before, these banks of the Narva had been blooming with life. The birch groves swayed gently, the meadows rolled in green waves, and the grain fields stretched golden and unbroken. Now all of it was scarred, torn open by shells, burned black by fire, pitted with craters. Wherever I looked, I saw only twisted steel, shattered earth, and the wreckage of men and machines. Grisha, trembling, dropped to his knees beside Uncle Vasya and whispered, "We've drowned them, Uncle. The fascists are gone." His words quavered between triumph and exhaustion. Vasya placed a firm hand on his shoulder, pulled him to his feet, and said quietly, "Stand tall, lad. Look across the bank. It isn't over yet." The two of them clung together, their faces grim but steady, staring at the enemy shore. At dawn on the 7th day, the ground began to tremble once more. The Germans renewed their assault, infantry pressing forward behind a shroud of smoke and artillery fire. Through the haze, I glimpsed one officer urging his men ahead, pistol raised, grenades strung across his chest. He was shouting for them to storm the trenches. "Do you see him?" Commander Kruglov asked Sidorov. "I see him, Comrade Commander." "Then why do you hesitate? Take him down." Sidorov exhaled slowly, aimed, and pulled the trigger. His rifle cracked, but the smoke swallowed the result. "Too many of them," he muttered, like devils crawling from a swamp. The battlefield boiled with confusion. Rifles fired blindly into the haze. Our machine guns rattled point blank at the advancing shapes. The Germans pressed closer, their outlines shifting in and out of the smoke. Orders rang through the chaos, grenades ready, intercept the tanks. Sidorov, Zakharov, Akimov and Sergeyev crept forward, clutching their bundles. I thought of nothing except the task before me. My grenade struck beneath a tank's treads. The blast hurled me to the earth. When I rose, ears ringing, I saw blackened smoke pouring from its side. 2 more tanks rolled forward, but Molotov cocktails and grenades crippled them too. Yet the assault did not stop. The Germans surged again, their cries echoing through the din. Our rifles fired until barrels glowed. Men collapsed in heaps, only for others to take their place. Major Chistyakov appeared, his face dark with smoke, his jaw clenched like iron. "Don't falter now," he roared. "We've driven them down before, and we'll drive them again." His presence steadied us, a wall of strength against the tide. Still, the days dragged on, each one worse than the last. By mid-August, the Germans had brought thousands of men and machines against us. Artillery pounded the riverbank without pause. Flames devoured dugouts and bunkers. The dead lay unburied, and the living stumbled like ghosts through smoke and mud. On the night of the 15th, a final order came. Kruglov gathered us, his face hollow with fatigue. "Comrades," he said, "we cannot hold longer. We must withdraw." His voice broke as he spoke the words, as though torn from his throat by force. That night we abandoned our positions, the same trenches we had bled to defend. Smoke still curled from shell craters. The river whispered indifferently past, carrying with it the ashes of our struggle. Before leaving, I found a letter tucked into the dirt by a fallen comrade, written by his son to his father at the front. Dear Papa, where are you? At night I think of you, and Mama cries. She hides her tears, but I see them. Come back to us soon. I am keeping your first letter close to me. The words struck deep into my heart. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my tunic, and swore silently that I would carry it back home one day. Kruglov himself stood apart, silent. When asked what his wife had written, he answered only, "She worries. She does not know how to soothe herself, and neither do I." Soon after, the news reached us. Kingisepp had fallen. The Germans had broken through. Retreat was unavoidable. Kruglov, unable to contain his fury, seized a machine gun and opened fire into the darkness, his bursts mingling with sporadic rifle shots. For a moment it seemed the rage of a man who had given everything and still refused to let go. But the order was clear. We pulled back from the Narva, leaving behind earth soaked in blood, our comrades' blood, and the silence of fields where once we had laughed and lived. That night our regiment pulled back to the Luga River after a forced march. By dawn we were already crossing to the eastern bank, digging trenches near Alexandrovskaya. The retreat had been bitter, day after day of fighting, then the exhausting march, men stumbling with blistered feet and hollow eyes. Some collapsed in the grass the moment we halted, asleep before their bodies touched the ground. I sat with Sidorov on the edge of a ditch, not far from the highway. Romanov stood nearby, leaning against the trunk of an old birch, his rifle cradled in his arms. His uniform, though worn, was still neat, his boots polished, his face calm. Beside him, a pair of radio operators worked silently, their headphones pressed close as they strained to catch German transmissions. The reports were grim. Enemy tanks were pressing through Kingisepp toward the very outskirts of Leningrad. "Grisha," Yeroshov said, suddenly breaking the silence, "they say old friends are forgotten." "Not true," replied Streltsov firmly, as he jammed sticks into the ground to camouflage a machine gun nest. "Old friendships don't die." Nearby, Vasily Dmitrievich spoke with passion, his voice glowing with conviction. His eyes shone brightly despite the mud clinging to his cheeks. "Tell me, have you ever cried, comrades?" "I did, once. In 1920, when the Whites cut down my frontline friend Senior. That's a soldier's lot." The words settled over us heavily. Around us, men smoked in silence, puffing thoughtfully on their cheap Makorka tobacco. Each drew strength from small comforts, a cigarette, a word of memory, the presence of a comrade. Soon the quiet was broken. The rumble of motors grew nearer. One after another, trucks rolled down the road, long barrels of German guns glinting through the haze. Our artillery replied from deep behind us, shells whistling overhead, crashing into the enemy. Black smoke billowed over the trees, mingling with the smoke of burning buildings. "Kingisepp is gone," Romanov muttered grimly, his face set. A warm wind swept across the battlefield, carrying the stench of fire and ruin. I remembered the town from before the war, the red roofs, the chimneys, the harbour filled with fishing boats. Now nothing remained but ruins. It was as if a hurricane had swept away every street, every home. The sun rose slowly over this blackened landscape. Our units, haggard and soot-covered, still clung to their positions. Marja Chistyakov strode along the line, his cap pulled low, his eyes sharp. He stopped often, crouching beside the wounded, whispering encouragement, reminding them they were not forgotten. More men arrived from the front, survivors from shattered regiments, bloodied but unbroken. They staggered into our line, weapons slung across their backs, faces blackened with soot, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. They joined us without words, simply falling into step beside our rifles. Then came Khmelev, a tall, broad-shouldered soldier of about 30, carrying a German machine gun taken from the field. His chest was dust-streaked, his gaze steady. He dropped onto the trench floor with a sigh and nodded to Romanov. Comrade Commander, I request permission to fight under your unit's banner. The fascists will not take Leningrad. At once the battalion staff began to argue, their voices rising in the smoky air. Some muttered bitterly over tobacco, others shouted in anger. The radios continued to crackle with grim reports. Leningrad is next, someone said flatly. Romanov stood taller, his eyes blazing. Then we'll defend it to the last man, he declared. But even in his voice there was a weight, a sense of inevitability, of battles yet to come that would test every last measure of strength within us. Lieutenant Khmelev spoke with quiet admiration. Look at Leningrad's volunteers. They know nothing of tactics, yet they block the enemy's path with bare hands, with bayonets, with grenades. What courage! And here we are, retreating. We need more tanks, more planes, yet they stand and fight. Sidorov tried to cut the tension with a grin. All right, comrades, enough of this gloom. You're too bitter. Let's find something brighter to think on. We sat together in an open meadow. The grass was damp, the earth scarred by shell craters. Overhead, an enemy reconnaissance plane droned slowly across the clouds, circling, watching. From far off, artillery boomed at intervals, like thunder rolling endlessly across the horizon. Then, unexpectedly, Khmelev's comrade Fadia, a stocky fellow of about 25, snatched up an accordion. He squeezed the bellows with a playful flourish, grinning as he let the first notes dance into the air. A blond young soldier leapt into the middle of the clearing, raising his cap, bowing theatrically, then spinning with a laugh. "Play it, Volodya!" someone shouted. Fadia's fingers moved more quickly, tapping out the rhythm. He began to sing, his voice full of warmth. "It's Saturday today, you're my lady, you're my mam." The old folk tune carried over the meadow, light and defiant. Others gathered round. Even from nearby trenches, men lifted their heads, listening. A few medical workers from the militia wandered closer, 2 young women with bandaged hands and tired eyes. One of them, slight as a feather, let herself be coaxed into dancing. Her boots tapped against the dirt, her body swaying with unforced joy. For a brief moment, the war seemed impossibly far away. "Sing it louder," came the call. "Give us Shura's voice." Nurse Shura, carrying her medical satchel, blushed, then raised her kerchief high and began to sing. Her voice was clear, ringing across the meadow. "And tomorrow's Sunday, you're my lady, you're my mam." Laughter broke out. Hands clapped, feet stamped the ground in rhythm. The hours passed like minutes, music and song lifting our spirits. For the first time in weeks, faces shone with something close to happiness. Even Khmelev, stern and weathered, allowed himself a small smile. But as suddenly as it began, the moment ended. Engines growled once more in the distance. The order rang out sharp and merciless. "To your places!" Kruglov approached Khmelev, his tone softened with respect. "Comrade Lieutenant, you've been ordered to pull back." Reassembly point to the rear. We embraced our comrades with quick words of farewell. "Don't be blue," someone muttered. "We'll meet again." And so the music faded, replaced by the rumble of artillery and the tramp of boots. Life confirmed the lieutenant's words in its own harsh way. Yes, we would meet again, but under entirely different circumstances. The Germans pressed forward relentlessly. Kingisepp had fallen, and their advance now threatened the Gulf of Luga and the very approaches to Leningrad itself. Columns of aircraft filled the sky, pounding our positions day and night. Each hour the front seemed to grow darker. Our lines were stretched thin, bolstered only by scattered artillery and the arrival of poorly armed militia. Every gun mattered, every trench was vital. Yet still the pressure grew, heavier with each passing day. That morning, the air above us filled with the shriek of Stukas. They swooped low, diving almost vertically, their sirens howling as if the sky itself were tearing apart. One pilot tried to pull up too late. Our machine guns caught him squarely, riddling the cockpit. With a scream of twisting metal, the bomber plunged into the earth and exploded, the fireball throwing dirt and smoke high into the air. For the first time we felt a flicker of triumph, but more came, wave after wave. The ground shook as the dive bombers and artillery pounded us. Trenches collapsed, soil poured down like water. One soldier beside me was buried alive up to his chest before we dug him out. His lips were blue, his eyes wide with shock, but he survived, for now. Still, we fired back. Romanov, Ulyanov, and Uncle Vasya manned their weapons with deadly focus. Each burst cut swathes into the advancing enemy infantry. Kasarian, crouched behind a shattered outpost, spat curses as he fired his machine gun until the barrel smoked. "They're not men, they're machines," he hissed. "Their hearts are armor." By nightfall, the battle had not ceased. We fought hour after hour until our rifles were hot in our hands and our ears rang from the endless thunder. Then, finally, came the order. A reconnaissance patrol was to cross the lines. Kruglov chose the men carefully. I was among them alongside Romanov, Sidorov, and Ulyanov. We were told little, only to move silently, without error, and return with what we learned. If discovered, there would be no rescue. We crept forward under cover of darkness, slipping through the fields toward the enemy trenches. The air was cold, damp with mist. Each step sank into the earth with a muffled squelch. Ahead of us loomed the faint outlines of German positions, their sentries pacing between shadows. Suddenly, machine guns opened. We froze, hearts hammering, then dropped flat. Bursts tore the ground only meters ahead of us. Somehow we were not hit. Crawling low, we reached the edge of their defences, where rough timber shelters jutted from the soil. Voices drifted out in harsh, guttural tones. German soldiers talking casually, unaware of our presence. Kruglov gestured sharply, and we waited. Minutes dragged like hours. Then, from the gloom, a figure stumbled toward us. At first, he seemed an enemy, but when challenged with password, he stammered in broken Russian, "I don't know." Romanov lunged, seizing him. The man cried out in panic, babbling incoherently. His eyes darted like a trapped animal. Kruglov's pistol pressed into his chest silenced him. He swore desperately on his life that he was no spy, only a lost soldier. We dragged him back toward our trench, suspicion still heavy in our minds. When we arrived, Kruglov said grimly, "If this German was speaking the truth, we'll know soon. If not, we'll learn something else." The night closed around us once more, the fields glowing faintly with the red fire of distant shells. The reconnaissance had begun. We slipped forward along the forest's edge, Romanov and Ulyanov moving first, their silhouettes melting into the gloom. After perhaps 50 meters, a shadow loomed ahead. A German soldier, helmet glinting faintly, stood guard with a light machine gun propped against the trench wall. Romanov called out sharply, "Halt!" The German froze, then barked back a reply, "Dummer Kerl, fool." "Password?" Romanov demanded. "Kugel," the German snapped. Romanov lowered his weapon slowly, keeping his eyes locked on the man. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To the Russians," the German answered. "Scouts. They've dug in across the brook." He raised his hand half-heartedly, attempting a casual salute, but the lie was clumsy. In an instant, Romanov's hand shot to his pistol, and Ulyanov's knife flashed in the dark. The German collapsed without a sound, his body folding into the trench. We crept farther along. Every shadow seemed alive. Another German was slumped in his dugout, chin on his chest. Romanov struck like lightning, a swift blow with the butt of his pistol, and the sentry sagged sideways, unconscious. His cigarette still smouldered between his fingers. Another 50 meters, and the trench bent sharply, leading into deeper positions. Romanov gestured for us to halt. The enemy's camp lay just beyond. Our nerves were stretched taut as bowstrings. The silence was unbearable. Kruglov's whispered order reached us. Romanov was to move ahead with a small group, approach the nearest sentry, and neutralize him quietly. I watched as Romanov crouched low, struck a match as though to light a cigarette, and stepped toward the guard. The German glanced at his watch and muttered, 14:05, 14:45. Romanov moved fast. His pistol cracked against the man's temple, and he crumpled soundlessly. We pulled the limp body aside, dragged it into the shadows. My breath came shallow, ears straining for the slightest sound of alarm. Nothing stirred but the endless hum of the night. Deeper still, we stumbled on another tank crew. The machine loomed in the dark, its hatch ajar. Inside, the glow of a cigarette illuminated weary faces, the crew playing cards. None of them had noticed us. We listened, memorizing their voices, their laughter, then moved on. At last we reached the edge of the forest and saw lights ahead, a clearing alive with German vehicles and troops. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline, grease, and damp earth. Somewhere a harmonica played faintly, the tune drifting eerily across the night. It seemed impossible that such casual music could exist here, a few hundred steps from death. The sergeant signalled us down. We crouched, hearts hammering, waiting. Orders were murmured. Major Kudryavtsev would mark the tank's positions, sketch the layout, and lead us back. The flare pistol was kept close, one signal, and our artillery would open up. We returned slowly, dragging the darkness with us, every step a battle against exhaustion and fear. Behind us, the tanks slept, their crews laughing quietly, unaware of how closely death had watched them that night. We waited in the trench, the damp earth clinging to our boots, while the scouts returned with German prisoners. They were pushed roughly along the grass track, guarded at bayonet point. At the commander's order, Major Kudryavtsev remained behind with me, eyes sharp, scanning the darkness. From time to time, the night split open with the streak of tracer rounds, and somewhere beyond the trees, the heavy chatter of German machine guns beat against the silence. At one point, Romanov struck a captive German with the butt of his pistol, snarling, "Why do you smile, vermin? Don't grin at us. You've killed enough." The German stumbled on, clutching his chest, his face twisted in fear. Moments later, Romanov's signal came, 3 sharp cracks in the air. Enemy flares hissed upward, bursting overhead. The night turned ghostly white, shadows melted, then froze in place as though pinned to the ground. We crawled on our stomachs through the tall grass, inch by inch, every blade sharp as wire against our faces. Sweat dripped into my eyes, and my chest burned with each breath. Around us, shells boomed in the distance. We were nothing but insects crawling across the earth, praying the next flare would not expose us. Suddenly, a green rocket soared high into the sky, followed by 2 more. "Signals," someone whispered. My stomach knotted. Ahead, no more than 30 meters away, enemy machine guns rattled furiously, stitching lines of fire across the field. The earth spat dirt into my face. Time dissolved. We could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. My arms and legs ached, my body trembling with exhaustion. Yet still, we crept forward. Then it happened. At Romanov's signal, I saw Sergeant Major Kudryavtsev dragging himself closer, his cap lost, his face pale as chalk. A burst of fire struck nearby. He faltered, slumping heavily into the grass. I reached out, pressed my ear to his chest. No heartbeat. "He's gone," I whispered. The words felt heavier than any bullet. A burst of fire struck nearby. He faltered, slumping heavily into the grass. I reached out, pressed my ear to his chest. No heartbeat. "He's gone," I whispered. The words felt heavier than any bullet. The order came for us to fall back. Slowly, painfully, we crawled through the wet earth, bullets whining overhead. At last, our own trenches loomed before us. Inside, men rose to their feet and pulled us in with strong arms, their faces smeared with grime, but alight with relief. When dawn broke, we assembled in the bunker. Major Chistyakov presided, his expression grim. Around the table lay captured German maps and documents, spread out in the flickering light of a lantern. He gestured toward a sheet, handed to him by Romanov. "What does this mean?" he asked a German officer, shoving the paper forward. The prisoner hesitated. At last, through clenched teeth, he admitted, "It is the Führer's directive. The objectives, the dates. Each city listed is to be taken by mid-August." Chistyakov's eyes blazed. He slammed his fist against the table. "You are late already. Today is the 13th. You will never set foot in Leningrad." His voice echoed through the dugout, steady and defiant, cutting through the weight of fatigue that hung over us all. The prisoners were dragged away, their boots scraping over the dirt floor. We gathered in silence, staring at the discarded sheet of paper on the ground. Crumpled and torn, it carried all the menace of the enemy's ambition, but also the proof that we had delayed it. At that moment, though weary and hollow-eyed, every man in the trench felt the same fierce truth burn inside him. We would fight, and Leningrad would not fall without our blood upon the earth. Twilight settled slowly over the battlefield. The guns had fallen silent for a brief spell, and we climbed out of the bunkers, breathing air that still carried the acrid tang of smoke. A few of us sat on the grass, backs against the damp earth, sharing quiet words. The moment felt unreal, as though the war had paused only long enough to remind us what peace had once felt like. Romanov passed around bread, Akimov produced a battered pot of soup, and we ate in silence. Every mouthful was precious. Each man chewed with deliberate care, knowing it might be his last meal for days. But even in this calm, the ground trembled. Artillery thundered from afar, and the sky flickered with the flashes of distant bombardments. We waited for the attack we all knew was coming. Soon enough, the silence broke. The horizon glowed as if aflame, and enemy planes droned overhead. Artillery shells rained down, the earth shuddering beneath each blast, the air filled with dust and choking smoke. That night, I stood in the trench beside Romanov. For the first time, sorrow crept into his voice. He looked at me and whispered, "If something happens to me, tell my mother her son was brave. Her health is failing. Promise you'll tell her." I answered, "What do you think, my heart? Is it armored?" He gave no reply, only tightened his grip on his rifle. Moments later came the cry, "Tanks!" The enemy emerged from the smoke, their machines grinding forward with steel jaws, guns flashing. Infantry poured after them, shouting their strange chorus, "Lie, la, lie." The sound was eerie, inhuman, carried over the roar of engines and cannon fire. We fired until our barrels smoked, until our shoulders were bruised by the recoil. Tanks loomed close, their turrets sweeping. Flames spewed from their guns, burning earth, grass, even men where they stood. It was the first time I had seen T-34s up close, their steel hides glistening with firelight, their tracks crushing all beneath them. The fighting grew savage. The road to Kingisepp and Krikovo was attacked 12 times in a single day. Each wave felt like the last, but still they came again and again. Our lines bent, broke, and closed once more. Only in close combat did we find our strength. A soldier's courage was multiplied when his hands could reach the enemy, when he could feel the weight of a rifle butt striking, a bayonet thrust home. Men no longer feared bullets when the enemy's breath was in their faces. It was during one of these attacks that Kruglov rushed from the trench, pistol in hand, shouting, "Ura!" His cry carried over the field like fire. We followed, hurling ourselves forward into the smoke. I remember the moment I was hit. A blast tore the ground near me, and something seared my side like white-hot iron. The force lifted me off my feet. I fell heavily, choking on dirt, the sky wheeling above. My hands groped at the wound, slick with blood. A fragment had buried itself deep into my flesh. I crawled toward the trench, gasping, vision blurring. Voices shouted around me, footsteps pounded past. "They've hit me in the leg," I screamed to no one in particular, though the pain burned through my whole body. Strong hands seized me, comrades dragging me back. Every step jarred the wound. Each breath felt like glass shards in my chest. At last, they lowered me into a crater where the wounded lay. Faces swam in and out of my vision. A boy pressing water to my lips, a medic fumbling for bandages, another soldier already lifeless at my side. I tried to rise but fell back, the strength gone from my limbs. "Hold on," a voice murmured. "An ambulance is coming." Time stretched. Somewhere nearby, a nurse sang softly, almost like a lullaby, her voice trembling but tender. Her words blurred, but the melody steadied my heart. Then came a doctor with stretcher bearers. My name was called, my body lifted, and I was carried through mud and smoke towards safety. My mind clung to one thought. I had survived. For now.